In this episode of the podcast, we're talking to Sam Hurd. Now, Sam is a popular wedding and portrait photographer. And if you are in that space, then I probably don't need to introduce him. You've likely heard his name. You have seen his work. If you're not in that space, if you're not a photographer, then let me say that Sam is one of the most influential photographers over the past 10 years. Many of the creative techniques that photographers employ today are because Sam popularized those techniques within his incredible images and the education that he puts out online. I wanted to bring Sam onto the podcast to have a conversation kind of rooted around the subject of creativity. And I have to say, that conversation did not disappoint. We're going to talk about not only how to be creative and what creativity is, but also outside interests and hobbies and passions that kind of fuel that creative drive. Without any further ado, let's jump straight in. This is the TSS Podcast. It's a place for authentic conversations to uncover the stupid, simple truths that help us succeed in business, create better relationships, and lead more fulfilling lives. Welcome to Think Stupid Simple. Sam, dude, it is good seeing your face. I don't think I've seen you for 3 years. It was WPPI a while back, a photography convention a while back. That was a long time ago.
It was. I'm trying to think what I was doing in my life that long ago. In a lot of ways, I feel like my life is exactly the same as 3, 6, 8 years ago. And in other ways, I'm like, this is a totally different world I'm living in now. It's bizarre. Well, it's good to see you.
It's good seeing you too, brother. And you've kind of designed, and I want to say thank you and I appreciate you for jumping onto the podcast. I'm going to be singing your praises throughout this whole thing, but I would first like to call attention to this wonderful backdrop and the way that you set this up is perfectly symmetrically. You know what? Can you give us an entrance, Sam? Can you just walk down and walk back up now so we can see how this is?
Hopefully don't see the shorts that I'm wearing.
It's okay. Party on top, party on bottom, party everywhere. Look at this. This is what I see when Sam walks in. He just comes up like, ha. This is, I expect nothing less from the Sam Hurd. So Sam, for those that are watching and listening, we have a lot of our audience is photographers. A lot of them are creatives. A lot of them are just people that are interested in a whole variety of subjects that have nothing to do with this stuff, which that is where I'm at as well. But you are a very influential person in this industry. And I can say this, I don't know where a lot of techniques originate from because who knows who does something first, but I do know it's usually very easy and clear to see kind of who popularizes something. And you have, whether you've invented or at least popularized many, many techniques that photographers are using around the world. There's been a lot, dude. You have prisming. So you hold a prism in front of a lens to kind of bend light and create shapes. I think you did the bronze tube too, right?
Ring of Fire.
The Ring of Fire. Yes. So this is where you take a bronze tube, you hold it over the lens.
This is the original one right here. It's actually
the original.
Mine. This is the OG right here. This is a piece of plastic with like silver aluminum paint that's actually really chipping off now. But yeah, the copper pipe became a lot more sort of the go-to thing because it was more easier to find. You could find that almost anywhere, like a plumbing section of Lowe's or something. Yeah.
And then there's, I also think free lensing, right? Like the disconnecting of a lens and kind of.
Free lensing has existed forever. And a lot of these techniques, I don't, it pisses many people off because it's like, what? Prisming? People have shot through prism. There's a book named Prismatics from the 1970s from such and such a photographer who shot through blah, blah. What I tend to, what I get most known for, the popularization comes from one, just giving it a name, like a catchy name, like the Ring of Fire, or two, having boiling it down to this specific exact object. Yes, people have photographed through glass elements and various prism-like things forever. I was the first person to take this exact 6-inch equilateral triangle that I found in a science shop on Amazon and say, this is what I use. This is why. And these are the variety of looks you can expect to get from it. Yeah. I mean, you can pick up a crystal or, a one-way piece of mirror or any other glass element. And technically it's sort of the same as prisming, but yeah, I really just narrow down to this exact tool. This is what I get for it. This is the name that I've attached to using this tool. And then, it goes from there. But anyway, so just to clarify there,
like people get all super offended about everything these days. But one of those things, like you said, is essentially claiming a technique. Now here's the thing: is like I think claiming a technique is bullcrap. Number one, because like you said, everybody's done all this stuff forever. But I think popularizing technique is far more impressive than any of those other things. And here's why: because maybe you're being humble in saying this, but popularizing technique, you not only need a name for it, you not only need kind of like mastery of that thing, and you're going to demonstrate like what you mentioned, but the piece that you're missing right now is you actually have to have the image, the thing that you're creating, the product has to be good enough that somebody else wants to replicate it. That somebody you have to actually demonstrate the technique in a way that's like, that doesn't suck, because anybody could grab a prism and put it in front of a lens. And I've seen plenty of piece of crap photographs where people take the techniques and take these things, and then they're like, no, I was the first person to do this, or I was and you're like, yeah, but you and you can't say this because it's art, and we're all going to get our butts hurt by anybody critiquing anything whatsoever. But it's you can't really say that you did something when the result of it is not that great. And I have sinned, my friend. My at the beginning of every podcast, I light my content candles.
Content candles. Candles. Huh.
This is my happy space, man. This is like when I'm creating content, I'm happy. And when I'm smelling candles, I'm happy. So I've paired the two of these together and created this little ritual that in general just makes me happy.
I like that you've combined. Not a lot of people play the, cooking with candles game of mixing and exploring the connection between two different scents. I like that. No, that's really cool.
It's actually a cognitive, like we can go deep into neuro-linguistic programming and stuff, but this is a cognitive technique called anchoring, where I'm actually like, so I've anchored a particular scent to creativity and content creation, and it makes me feel like, so when I smell this, I think of that. And when I think of this, I smell like it kind of ties those two things together.
Totally
that
makes sense, especially with scent.
Yes.
But just to wrap it up. So it popped in my head when you were talking about free lensing. So free lensing is a technique that's literally existed forever since like the original cameras. But what you need in some of these techniques, whatever it is sort of a unique angle in approaching the use of the physics in this case with the free lens. So what I got known for and popularized it by was taking a specific lens, the Nikon 50mm f 1.8D, the like really affordable $99 one. Yes, that one. And ripping the metal mount off because it's a 1.8 aperture, the rear element is really narrow compared to something like a 1.4 or 1.2. And combined with that narrowness and the lack of metal now, you were able to get really extreme, very easy access to these free lens effects. And I still, to this day, shoot with that exact lens that you see in those photos from that blog post like 8 years ago. Yeah. And it's wonderful. So that, unique approach to using this technique that has existed forever is what really made it spark and kick off for a lot of people. Plus, again, just the fundamental boiling down to like a simple explanation of how it's being done. So
now I love that explanation, and I'm going to ask you about this in just 1 second, but I do have to give Anthony a shout out right now. So we filmed roughly 10 episodes, and that right there was Anthony's smoothest transition so far into
it's beautiful.
Like, to be fair, I've only been doing this for 2 days. So
it was 10 2 days.
So good.
Not expect too much of me.
In contrast, in our last episode, in our last episode, we had a Steve Jobs quote. that we had referenced. I was actually speaking with Spencer from MagMod, the founder of MagMod, and we had a Steve Jobs quote that Anthony pulled up about 90 minutes after we had actually talked about the quote. So in contrast, that was
would
like
really mess with my ADD. I would not. Yeah, if you pop that on me 60 minutes later, I'd be like, wait a second. It would almost wipe out the entire conversation. By the way, he is somebody I want to reach out to because I'm so desperate for some camera manufacturer to make off-camera, strobes, like little lightweight flashes that are drones themselves, that you can just put in position without a remote. You just, you say you need a flash like up behind someone's head. You just hold it there, you hit a button, it just
stays.
drones in place. It just stays in place.
Yeah.
Don't need to move it at all with any extra like iPhone app or remote control. It just stays there, and it is the flash itself built into it. I think this is a product that could absolutely exist.
Yes.
Because you could super streamline and get the exact size of the propellers and the RPMs and everything on them dialed into the exact weight of that flash instead of having to, people have put flashes on drones, but I want to see a product where the drone is the flash.
No, that would be an actual, that would be an actual consumer. I'm happy to make that introduction, by the way. I'll do that after this, but that would be an actual consumer, like where photographers would actually be able to use that on a mass market scale. Like, cause there's a difficulty in like getting a drone and attaching a flash to it and doing all that kind of stuff that
it's loud. I think you could minimize the noise. If it was, again, the propellers were dialed into the exact size and weight of this thing, you could, what do you need? Like a 10-minute duration at most for a couple of different photos. So you could have a really lightweight, small battery. You wouldn't have to have a drone that was trying to, cram as much battery life as possible. Like all the, everything on the market right now, really, unless it's like a super lightweight toy drone that wouldn't do anything. Anyway,
it's a brilliant idea. So going to this, I mean, not only do you popularize these techniques, but then like that blog post, you also take many of these techniques and you publish them. A lot of them get picked up on SLR Lounge, our own publication for photography. A lot of them go to F-stoppers. They go to Petapixel. They get published everywhere. And on top of that, you have your own platform where people can learn if they want to dive in more, right? You have a Patreon where people can. So if you know Sam, and you've seen his work, you really should be on there. Just a heads up. But one of the things that I want to ask is putting all this information out there. So much of it is free. How do you feel when you see people? Well, first, my question is, how do you feel when you see people running with these techniques and taking them and kind of making them your own, making them their own?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that the conversation is going in this direction, because literally just yesterday, I was starting to uncover, like, man, what is the state of prisming? I keep getting these ads for Prism Effects Company or something. It's a manufacturer. And when I started using prisms and stuff way back in the day, people were like, oh, you should sell those. And I was like, yeah, I guess I could just buy a bunch and resell them. This company and a few others now have done the work of like really crafting their own glass and like making their own product, I guess manufacturing it themselves, obviously from China or something. But I kept seeing these ads and I was like, man, prisming is still a thing. People are still doing prism photography. And the more I took a deep dive, the more I was like, oh no, I'm still at least high on the Google rankings. I think I'm still like number one. Like my blog post is definitely, Google gives a lot of authority to time and the duration that a post has existed. But, YouTube is probably, I would say, 10 times, 100 times more popular than articles, which I find crazy. I do not understand. I personally, even though I do make occasional YouTube videos and such, I hate watching videos to try and learn stuff. I really prefer to read because I can skim things, I can digest it in sections where I want to. And I'm still kind of shocked that YouTube is, anyway, but I don't know how many hundreds of YouTube videos have been made about using prisms. And so the more and more I started to research, just yesterday, the more I was like, I really need to get somebody to write a Wikipedia article, because that really seems to be the authority.
The ultimate authority.
The ultimate authority on the origin of an idea. Because people keep, optimizing their SEO. I'm going to be knocked off the number one spot at some point for a lot of these ideas. Well, I don't know if I'm prepared for that.
to put this into context, I mean, this is like, if you were outside of the photography space, this would kind of be like designing, like a very unique way of making coffee and saying, this is my way of doing this, and this is how you can get to a better cup of coffee. And then putting it out into the world and watching not only all these other people come in and say, this is great, we're going to take this, we're going to imitate it. But then you also see companies coming in and saying, hey, we're going to build products off of that idea. And
there you go.
Most of them don't actually, like, nobody's going to source you for it. Nobody's going to be like, yeah, I learned this from Sam. Nobody's going to be like, that's one of my frustrations personally in the industry is I always try to bring attention to the people that I learn from and to the people that like have inspired me, or even if it's just like, I remember doing that in one of yours. I actually did a video with your day for night shot. So it's an interesting thing that I'm very curious how you feel when people take something and run with it and maybe don't attribute or even recognize where it came from.
It's inevitable. That is inevitable, because even if you in good faith try and do that, all it takes is one degree of separation for that to completely break down. Somebody can come up with a new take on the day for night shot and source you as you. I mean, I guess if every single person in the chain sources the original person,
you never get back to it.
You'll never get back to it. So it's okay. I mean, at the end of the day, it'll run its course, and it keeps me motivated in moving on to something else. I mean, sure. As soon as I blogged Prisming, I was on to other ideas, like using our red, green, and blue filters to create this cool. You can just do it in like literally any app now, but in camera, you could create a triple exposure that would separate the red, green, and blue channels. And I don't know if you ever saw an example of this. It's somewhere on my website. Yeah, I did. And you could do that multiple exposure in camera and force the separation of those color channels and create a really awesome in-camera effect. Yeah, it's somewhere on that main page. Yeah. You'll see. There it is. There it is.
That's dope.
Yep. So fun.
So I'm because from a creator standpoint, I want to ask you the question. I have my own opinions on this, but I want to hear yours. What is your impetus? What is your drive then to be putting the information out there and to be sharing this with everybody? What do you benefit from in that process?
Oh, well, a lot of things. I mean, first of all, teaching workshops and doing something like Patreon has some revenue attached to it. So that provides a diversified source of money making for me, which I've always been paranoid and obsessed with, because, once I quit my full-time photography job to do weddings full-time, I was like, I'm not going to do that until I have something other than weddings also funding things, because you're bound to have down cycles in your business with weddings. And I mean, certainly literally everybody can relate to that this year. And so you need stuff that is on a different cycle, so to speak, to kind of float you through that. And then, but the primary thing is literally, in that moment when I hit publish on something like Prisming or the freelance information and all that, is just to give once I can be free of it and it's out there publicly, I should rephrase that. Once it's out there publicly, I can be free of it as a thing and move on to something else. It gives me a motivation to not be attached and associated to this one thing I figured out and can be replicated endlessly once it's out into the world. I mean, I think that is part of it. It's a motivation for me to move on.
And I appreciate that aspect of it. I can understand that from a writer's perspective, because so many of the things that I do, if I don't put them down on paper, if I don't make them real, they're monkeys on your back. Like you're literally just, you're weighted down by these things of like, I need to put these ideas out into the world. But I'll be honest, when I entered the industry roughly 10 years or so ago, the idea of putting your kind of techniques and trade secrets out there for other people to learn was kind of still taboo. Like that's not something that people would do. And there was this fear that like, well, if I teach, if I show, then people are going to steal it and they're going to take from it. And what would you say to those individuals?
That's true. But why does that make you if nothing else, again, it has to serve as a motivator to make you diversified in your techniques and approach as a photographer to create other looks. I mean, the other aspect of that is if you at most, what are you going to have? Like a dozen different techniques at most figured out that are genuinely new and kind of unique to your look. I don't know. I just think it doesn't matter. I don't see the point. Like if somebody is going to steal it and take it for themselves, again, I'm off to the next thing. Like you want to be the genesis of the ideas. And if you know that truly to yourself, even if it's an idea that ended up being completely done before, if for yourself you made a discovery, it's so gratifying and it's so fulfilling, and it just enriches you and excites you about your craft, whatever it is. Again, even so I tend to limit my exposure to other educators and, of course, like I mentioned already, YouTubers and all that kind of stuff, because I don't want to have that outside influence possibly navigating me too much in a direction but if I do figure out something that turns out it's already been done or whatever, I still feel incredibly fulfilled for having just cracked it on my own.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know if that makes sense, but
what you just said brings up another kind of thought and question. But first, I feel like there are. So when this old school mentality of kind of like holding things to yourselves, I think it is a very nearsighted and short-term mentality of like, this is anybody that's holding a secret because that's how they make money. If how you make money and how you make a living is tied to certain techniques, you're in trouble. Because those techniques can be easily replicated. So as soon as someone comes along and replicates it, and if they don't learn it from you, they're going to learn it from somewhere, because there's plenty of places to learn it from. But if your revenue is tied to a technique, you are in deep trouble of losing that revenue stream.
It's a likely flash in the pan, and it's like you said, a risky place to be. And I mean, if you go on anything, social media, TikTok or whatever, like every technique in the world is being exposed and exploited 100 million times a day by everybody trying to get famous through it going viral. Like it's just that ship has sailed in a lot of ways. But I think I'm actually a lot more interested these days in something that has been a mindset alteration for me since launching my Patreon feed. And that's just the idea of investing in the evolution of ideas, coming along for the ride for somebody that is like constantly iterating and evolving what they do and how they think about things, and capitalizing on that aspect of it as far as running a business goes. My entire Patreon model clicked into my head because I had, for at least a year or two, been following a podcast called Stratechery, which I highly recommend. It's run by basically a tech blogger. He just tech commentator. I don't know what you'd call those people, but his name is Ben Thompson. And he runs a subscription blog, $10 a month. And it's just an ongoing insight into his thoughts about whatever's new in tech for the day. Basically, he blogs every day. He's a super, super, super smart guy and has incredibly cool insights, sometimes really, really deep, and other times, just kind of going along with what everybody else is saying. But at the end of the day, people are like, why don't you write a book? Like, you should release a book. And he's like, I think my blog actually has way more value once you've released a book with some idea. Like he's kind of notable for his idea of aggregation theory and how it influences tech companies and how the math changes, the economy changes when you have a marginal cost of zero, which is basically what you can assume now with companies like Google and Facebook and all these digitized companies. They have a marginal cost of zero for any new customer. And anyway, at the end of the day, he's right. Like, his blog is a way better resource than a book, because once you publish an idea in a book, it is there. And you can release version 2, but it's immediately out of date, especially if it's something like what he talks about, technology. It's out of date that same week that it's released. A blog can be corrected for, evolved, and he makes a crap ton of money on this like niche. And it wasn't always that case, but he just saw it through to where it is today. And he's incredibly successful. He's literally interviewing like CEOs of Microsoft and such now. It's like, oh my gosh, this guy's come a long way. But no. So what I had realized, it was close to a decade ago, was first, I kind of realized the reluctance of a lot of professional photographers to share their knowledge. And when I started sharing kind of the things that I was learning, and I'm, we're learning every single day, right? Like I don't know if you've kind of clued on this, but several years back, and I'm sure you have actually, it's a weird way to say that, but several years back, I started to realize that anybody that says they have mastered anything, I don't care what it is, if you say that you've mastered something, those are literally the people that have just started. Like, if they're like, I
I'm a master of lighting. I'm like, you don't know shit about lighting. Like that is the bottom line truth is if you say that word, you really don't know what's going on. Because the more you start to learn, the more you realize how much you don't know, right? And there's an actual
Oh my gosh,
I think there's
absolutely.
a Kruger or something effect to describe this syndrome. But what I started realizing a while ago was that if I took the little knowledge that I had and I shared it, not only were people appreciative, but there were so many other benefits that came from it. One, you start to, like you said, build that audience, right? That might be interested in your development and the way that you're progressing. You start building an audience that would then be in tune to maybe purchase products down the road as you start to develop these thoughts. You start opening up opportunities to work with other people who are just happen to be interested and they want to hire you. I've had so many clients that are SR Lounge photographers that they subscribe and they're like, yeah, I don't know if I'm ever going to make this into a living, but I love photography and I want you to, to shoot, all the way to commercial gigs. So the amount of benefit that there is in putting out good information is huge. I kind of wanted to just hear what your thoughts on it were. And it sounds like you're on the same kind of wavelength in 100%. Terms of like,
yeah. And one of the best benefits is the pushback you get from other people. I mean, you're automatically going to be limited by if say you had this thing figured out, whatever it is, and you keep it to yourself and you're just in your own little head about it. You are robbing yourself of so many different perspectives, oftentimes really like aha, duh moments that somebody else surfaces to your realization through asking a question, like a clarifying question about some aspect of it you hadn't really considered. And it can take you down a whole new path, but that's never going to happen if you are 100% in your own head about your own ideas. You need that pushback. And that's a really uncomfortable, frustrating, awkward thing to experience sometimes. If you've ever put a video on YouTube and take a scroll through the comments, you're just like, oh God, yeah. People call you out on all kinds of crap.
That's
Most
brutal.
of it, it's like whatever, but some of it can be really, really valuable.
Yeah.
And you can sort of take that into consideration and optimize. And
if you don't mind filtering, you kind of have to filter out the mud to find those little gems of critique. And there are good gems of critique in there. But yeah, you can't let it get to you. And so the one of the interesting things that I found in watching kind of your career and the way that you've taught and the way that you educate is the level of transparency that you have. I remember, I think it was like 3 years ago, where one of my team members comes upstairs and is like, I'm subscribing to Sam's Patreon. And I'm like, that's cool. And they're like, did you know Sam gives us all of his revenue numbers? I'm like, no, that's crazy. And there it was, like he had it printed out, like this is all of Sam's income
how much
streams.
Money I make, where it all comes from and where it all goes. Yeah, that's due for an update, I think.
I kind of love that side of it. Because one, you have the liberty of doing something like that. I think once you have a company and a team with, different employees that are, each making different amounts of money, I think there has to be some sort of sensitivity to putting that out.
Totally.
But I love that fact because there's so many fake gurus, dude. Like, and in 2020, I feel like there's going to be even more because people are kind of stuck. They can't they're seeing this online, kind of everybody's online. So let's become an online guru. Let's become a teacher, an educator. And if you want to do that, by all means, but I feel like at the point where you're actually charging money, where you're actually taking value, you really have to know the craft. You really have to know whatever it is that you're teaching. And I see too many people that jump into it. They've literally taken one course and they're like, I am now qualified to teach this. And so
happens all the time.
Yeah.
The vast majority of what's out there, like you said, that's what's occurring.
It is probably 90% of, I would say that number might even be understated, but probably the vast majority of online education is from fake gurus. And I think the ultimate, I don't know if you can think of anything better, but to me, the ultimate resume to whether or not you're qualified to do something is your success in it. And the one universal scoreboard that we all have is revenue. That's it.
Yep.
That is the universal scoreboard.
Absolutely. 100%. I keep seeing these photographers talk about making six figures in their like pitch for some business plan or whatever, which it's got a ring to it, like make six figures, but relative to what, like in what country, in what way, how much of that is actually profit? Like there's so much that people end up kind of exploiting or masking. I don't know the right way to put it, but I guess, it all boils down to just people have learned something legitimate from somebody before them, at least in that it resonated with them and gave them some meaningful insights. And then they are reinterpreting that with their own brand or workshop series or whatever it is. It's a really tough thing to navigate. And as a consumer, I've struggled with this. I don't have time to do everything that I need to do to run an effective business. I wish I could become an expert in SEO. I wish I could become an expert in how to run the perfect ad campaign on Google.
Yeah.
But, there's only so much time in the day. At the end of it, I just want to be a wedding photographer. Like, that's also what it completely boils down to. I love shooting weddings. I literally never want to do anything else. Yeah. But I struggle. Like, man, I have, $500, $700 a month. I could probably easily pay somebody to, take control of my marketing or do my ad campaign strategy or whatever it is. I literally don't know who to trust. I can't. I've hired a few different people, and they're all just like, half of them are sourcing it out to Fiverr. And I'm like, this sucks.
That's crazy.
Like, I literally can't find the people that know what they're doing. And honestly, the people that do know what they're doing, probably it's a trick. It's like, you got to know them personally or through somebody else, because they don't need to advertise to get more work. It's like,
no, I mean, this is part of the reason that I wanted to create this podcast is to have a place to have authentic, real conversations, to call bullshit on things, because this is away from YouTube and sponsorships and from everything. This is our platform. We don't have any agendas. We don't have anything. And I can say here that, look, if you're making 6 figures as a photographer, you're not doing that great. Like, if you're making $100,000, and there's so many marketing programs that do this. Now, number one, the vast majority, and I know a lot of these people, the vast majority that are selling these products are not actually generating $100,000 a year in photography.
100%. The vast majority. They're generating it from the course that they sell.
They're generating it from the course that they're selling to unfortunate people who buy into the marketing schemes. Number two, if we were to actually rephrase that statement of, let's say, the 6-figure, I'm going to make you a 6-figure photographer. If you want to restate that phrase for authenticity, it's, I'm going to show you how to make $30,000 a year take home. That's what it is. If you're making $100,000 a year as a photographer, you're fortunate if you're taking home $40,000 of that on average.
And that's not going to get you very far in most markets. That if you're near any basically major city, it's tough. It's really,
it is. You'd be better off going and working at McDonald's, man. Seriously, like you there's so many other routes, but the marketing language of, I'm going to show you how to be a 6-figure photographer. So then that's not enough. So then the next person comes along and like, now it's going to be the 7-figure photographer. And you're like, dude, none of you are actually doing what you're saying that you do. So anyway, that was a moment for me that I was like, good for you, Sam. This is proof and evidence of kind of just, you are who you are, and what you're teaching is authentic and it works. So I appreciated that aspect about that. Man.
Well, good. I'm glad. You're right. At the end of the day, it all boils down to actual math and numbers. And I don't think to this day seen anybody release. I had, some stuff censored out, personal, whatever, but my tax forms, basically my tax returns right there on the article. And you can't get much more transparent than that. But there are other fun ways. I literally just made a post talking about SEO, what my quote strategy is. And, I know a lot coming from computer and information science is what I studied in college. So I know a lot about computers and technology, and I love it. I'm very into that part, but I'm not an SEO expert by any means. Like I said, there's not enough time in the day. But in this article, the basic, most simple thing I could share, aside from some of the tools that I use to monitor and track and optimize as best I can, is like, here's my daily traffic stats and the keywords that I target and rank for. And it gives like the word you used earlier, an anchor for people to have some sense of like where they actually are relative to me, which it would be nice if they had more points of reflection if other photographers would share their stats or whatever. But I think it's really illuminating to have those actual raw numbers to have
Oh, 100%.
Anyway, yeah.
So this is what's really interesting. And one of the big conversations that I wanted to have about you was around the subject of creativity itself. Now, we're going to relate this in the sense of photography and whatnot, but I want to carry this to a more broad sense as well. But just tell me this, because your background, didn't you work for NASA?
Yeah, not quite, but close. So I feel very fortunate to be able to pin down, how many times in your life do you know to the exact day where your life would have gone this way or this way?
Oh, yeah.
That's a really rare occurrence.
For sure.
It can't be very many. And, when I was I had an extra semester in school, so I was graduating that December when I should have graduated in the spring, but I stayed an extra semester just for whatever. And around November, I was basically exclusively hitting Craigslist for job listings, working in, what my studies were related to.
And what were your studies, by the way?
Yeah, computer and information science. Okay. So I did computer science with a minor, I think, was in network security, something, and some other thing. I don't know. I never used it because what happened was I interviewed I submitted probably 100 different applications to various jobs in that field over Craigslist, which I don't know. Hopefully it still does, but I was kind of surprised how many listings were there for legitimate, awesome jobs. And I essentially came across in my research a job for a NASA. It was a company that had a ongoing contract with NASA.
Got it.
Science Systems and Application Incorporated. So they were a NASA contractor.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the company name, Science Systems and NASA, or Science Systems Inc., or something like that. They're based outside of DC, Greenbelt, or something like that. And on basically, it ended up being on the same day I got an interview with them, working literally alongside, all of their projects directly with NASA Goddard, right down the street. And then I got another interview for the exact same day, working at this place called the National Press Club. They had a listing for a photographer full time that was kind of wishy-washy. They had never had a full-time photographer. The Press Club is an amazing place, but it's very rare in that it's hard to describe the kind of environment that it is. But there's like a general manager, and it's basically like a country club for journalists, but it's also really renowned because it's a block from the White House. And like historically, there have been some incredibly well-known speeches and people that have come through their doors. It's a place that you would host an event to have a press conference, literally in DC. If it wasn't at a government building or the White House or something like that, it would be at the Press Club. And so anyway, I knew nothing about its 100-year history, but same day I interviewed for both places and was offered a job at both. And I had to decide, was I going to take the desk job that was literally the salary started twice as much as the Press Club job? Was I going to take that and have job security likely and be able to work my way up the kind of chain probably pretty easily, pretty quickly, or take the full-time photography position where they didn't even own a camera yet. It was kind of like, yeah, we'll figure out you have your own camera, and if you need stuff, we can work that into the budget. And so I took that job. I had to decide that day, and it was a really tough decision, but I'm glad I did it because it just set me down this entire life path that I never otherwise would have done, because that's how I got my first wedding. Man.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a lot of us are glad that you did it, but and this brings me to that next question, which is, I mean, your background is highly technical. And now you're going down this road of highly creative. So I'm very curious as to how did you start to bridge that creative gap? How are you starting to hone that side?
That's always been my approach to literally everything. My entire time in college was spent recording musicians and writing music and being a musician. That wasn't my major, but that was literally all I did with all of my time outside of the classroom. So my approach, since I can remember, I guess since I was 11 years old, was to always do the thing that didn't come naturally to me in terms of like signing up for computer classes. Yeah, I like computers, but I am not good at math. So that was the thing I immediately wanted to be taught. I wanted to be surrounded by people that knew exactly what it was. So it would be crammed down my throat. And yeah, I might not get A pluses super easily, but if I can get by with a B minus, then the delta of what I've learned is gigantic. And then the things that I'm naturally gifted at in terms of music, which is primarily what I thought I would be doing professionally until I left college. If I can keep that active by my own sheer will, accumulating a ton of credit card debt to buy a bunch of preamps and really nice microphones and headphones and guitars to make these little albums. I made about 15 records, not just of myself, but I think I did 3 personally, and then 15 total with other bands and stuff that were in my school. I made all those records in my dorm room. And so I was basically like working 2 full-time jobs then, going to school and making music. And that's what I really wanted to do, is run a studio. And I just happened to get this, job at the press club doing photography, which I'd always liked too, but I never thought I'd ever do photography professionally. And it just kind of looked out that way. So I've always had like super crazy science emphasis, super crazy arts emphasis, all the way down to my it's like it runs in my family. It's weird. My uncle was giving my sister and I, he was the superintendent of a school in this small area of Davidsville, Pennsylvania. One Thanksgiving, probably like 6-7 years ago, he's driving us to this new school that was just built. He'd been the superintendent for years, but he took my sister and I. His kids were really into sports and academics. Mm-hmm. My sister and I were really into music and art. And he said, knowing us, because we would see them every year or every holiday, they were their closest extended family that we would spend time with, even though they were far from us. Knowing us and his kids kind of inspired his development and the literal design of the new high school, where it was a V shape or an A shape, and one wing was arts and science, and one or arts and I don't know. What would you call like English and all that stuff? Arts,
literary arts,
craft.
And everything.
Yeah, I don't know. One was arts, and the other was science. And so and somewhere sports kind of like met in the middle. That was probably the center, because he was also a professional, or I think he was a college level Air Force Academy coach or something like that. So he really loved football. Anyway, that blew my mind. I was like, yes, this is how every school should be designed, like equal emphasis on both arts and science. But separate. There's separate vacations, but they kind of meet in the middle. And this blew my mind. I was like, this is so cool. This is such a great legacy that he's leaving, the small town of Davidsville, Pennsylvania. I think they have one stoplight. Anyway, that was totally random story.
Nobody thinks this way, dude. I mean, you're 10 or 11 years old and you're sitting there thinking, I'm good at music and arts, so therefore I'm going to focus on my weaknesses. Like nobody.
Yeah, 100%, man. Enroll me in. I did not earn the grades. I'm not exactly sure how I was even able to do it. I think I just check marked the box when you first started to register for classes, honors, everything. And again, I wasn't a very particularly good student, but I'm like, if I can get a B minus or a C plus in honors classes, then that translates to, perfectly acceptable A minus, B plus, average, or whatever the regular classes were. So I'm going to go for the honors. And then my entire social circle, the friends that I was surrounded by, all of these people, all my friends went to way better schools and are much more successful academically than me. But being in that orbit was the key. I don't know why.
So interesting, because I would argue that the majority of adults don't really ever learn how to run towards those things that are uncomfortable. And if we do learn that lesson, it comes at the late 20s, maybe early 30s, if we're lucky. But that is the huge key to kind of unlocking this, your potential is to run towards those things that are uncomfortable. The things that you're not good at are the things that need to be focused on. And it kind of blows my mind that you had that foresight when you're 10 years old.
That is weird. I'm trying to think if there was some inspirational figure in my life, or some reason. I really don't know. I can't point to it specifically. It must have been a combination of things.
Then I want to hear your take on the statement of you're either born with it or without in reference to creativity. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it can be taught. If that's, I think like anything, it's going to be more intuitive or naturally occurring in some people and others not. But I certainly think it can be taught. There's a method to the madness. You get more comfortable over time if you put yourself in uncomfortable situations. So my answer would be, what was the question? Also, I'm really bad ADD. I'm surprised I've hung on this long.
I have ADHD too, bro. Don't worry.
Who doesn't? Yeah.
So I actually was clinically diagnosed with it a month ago, surprisingly.
Whoa.
Yeah. Like I've had it all my life. But that's a different topic. But yeah, the idea that, I always hear, and I hear this, it's really unfortunate. I hear it oftentimes. It comes from people that are very well established in a particular area. It could be music, it could be, art, it could be photography, but I hear them say things to the effect of you're either born with it or you're not. And I couldn't disagree more. I do think, like you said, I think everybody has a natural aptitude towards certain things, and you're genetically whatever. You're genetically aligned to kind of, find certain things that fit better with who you are and your personality and whatnot. But also as looking at photography and creativity as a whole, I can tell you, to me, it feels like muscle memory. To me, it feels like working out, like lifting weights, like anything else that I would do in the gym, where the first time you're going and it's super uncomfortable, you're super sore, all this kind of stuff. But as your muscles develop, you begin to learn and grow, and the movements become natural. And that's the way that I see photography and lighting and everything. Is most of the time, when it comes to, I kind of divide out my photographic kind of experiences into two areas. One is play, which is like every week I'm doing test shoots, and that's just like where I'm screwing around, throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And then you have the actual game time itself, where you're working for a client. And now people always go and they look at the client work and they say, "Oh my goodness, how are you so creative? And I don't have that, and I don't have this." And I go, "Look, my client work is me going out and doing the things that I've practiced. It's muscle memory. It's me going out and doing the things that I already know because I'm being paid to do those. My play does not look anything like this. It looks like screwing up. It looks like messing around. It looks like throwing out half the things that I do, if not more. But what you're seeing in practice is that refined set of creative tools. It's muscle memory." So I always get blown away at the statements of like, you're either born with it or without. I'm like, man, it's like playing an instrument. I think my understanding and approach to photography has been super informed, even though you might look at them and think they're totally different things. They're exactly the same. Playing an instrument is exactly the same as working with a camera. There's more technical aspects because a camera is electronic, but that muscle memory, literally, when you start to break down what you're doing using these tools like freelensing or prisming, it's almost the same as like holding a violin in the way that my body just tends to function. I've always been desperate for the other side of the equation, my left hand, instead of just holding the camera and balancing it. I want to do other things. That's why I love, I don't work for them in any capacity, but I love the Canon mirrorless lenses. There are RF lenses that have the control rings. Like finally, I can dial that into a meaningful task for my left hand. But anyway, you're right. It all boils down to just being muscle memory and practicing. It's something I talked about in a lot of my workshops, is the way that I learned how to use light painting to light night shots. The proof of concept, for example, of that day for night shot that you were mentioning earlier, where I split the frame down the middle in an in-camera double exposure with daytime on one side, nighttime on another. I practiced that in my bathroom with two little Russian dolls and my camera, turning the light off and turning the light on before that wedding day. And I knew exactly the pattern and the format or the series, the sequence of steps that I would take to do this. And, that's all you need is control of the light. I needed lights on, lights off, two subjects and a freaking camera. And I had it
down. I mean, it was executed the very first time I did it. It was perfect. The second time I did it, it was a horrible mess because I did it indoors. I was like, oh, well, yeah, I can just do this indoors. I don't have to wait for the sun to go down. And there were all kinds of problems with that in a real life scenario that I didn't anticipate. And anyway, it's a really tough thing to pull off. But yeah, I worked that muscle memory. I got the proof of concept down and boom, it worked. So
this is shot, right?
Yes, that is the photograph.
Cool.
One.
I love hearing that, dude, because that's exactly how it works. And people don't realize that these things are proved beforehand. And to relay this back to
sometimes you get lucky. We can't discount like sometimes people just stumble into genius. That can happen.
that can happen for sure. But like your analogy of the musical instruments, right? I'm a guitar owner. I don't dare to call myself a guitar player. But when I see somebody play beautifully, what I see is them stringing together things that they've learned over 20 years in a way that's unique to them. If you take any one riff or any grouping of notes out of that sequence, it's not unique. What's unique is the way that they're kind of putting it together. Now, we look at that and we say that's creative, but what that really is muscle memory. It's learning all these things like you did in the bathroom, saying, okay, A plus B plus C, this actually works. I get to a concept, and then you go and you execute that. Now, when you stumble into genius, there are moments where like sometimes something jumps into your head that's so completely out of the usual. And there are moments like that where you get struck like that. But most concepts, I would say, is a stringing together of multiple things that you have learned from the progression of that craft, whatever that craft might be. So
I think the creative aspect of it is having that practice and awareness, but then being comfortable deviating from that and exploring a space where you don't have the muscle memory, when you can kind of marry those two ideas
The it's just like learning a language. It's kind of like as you grow up, you just learn more vocabulary, find out which words kind of express your ideas more, and you can string together these eloquent sentences that just beautifully paints a picture or something like that. I think it's just like that, really anything.
Wonderful analogy. And that's exactly how it is.
Yep. You almost, it's like, so it's unfortunate you don't play the guitar. Or have you ever written a song? Have you ever written?
Like you, I actually produced music, so I could play guitar in a studio to actually make music and stuff like that. But I wouldn't get on a stage.
More about this, man. I reignited my entire musical sort of hobby this year.
Did you?
Oh man, yeah. I put out like three new songs. I started a project called Cope with Hope. It's all me, but I play and write all the parts and everything, drums, bass, and blah blah blah. Anyway, it's fun to talk about that.
Can you pull this up? Is it online? Can we pull it up while you're talking about it?
Yeah.
And we have no agenda, dude. We talk about whatever the heck we want to talk about, man.
What I wanted to say is what's amazing to me, and it's still, even being aware of this for the past 20 years that I've written music, it still blows my mind. If I sit down with a guitar, start strumming out a rhythm, and then I start just mumbling nonsense, nothing makes sense. You just start, you latch onto some kind of melody, and then that melody turns into sort of words that don't make sense at all. And sometimes they never really do. But at the end of the day, when I've finished an entire song, 90% of the time, I can be on a run listening to it, fully produced. And I'm like, oh, I realize what this song is about. This song makes perfect sense. The one I just released called Distilled, I wrote right when everything kind of shut down this year, around end of April, something like that. And I realized, okay, I'm drinking way too much, not to go too serious, but I was drinking too much alcohol. I was literally probably flirting with half a bottle a day.
Oh, that's a good amount, dude. That's a lot of calories.
Dude, it was bad. And, I don't know if I developed a physical dependency on it or not, but I realized I'm going to be home a lot more than I've ever been before. I'm used to being on the road and traveling. And that was always sort of my, I would rarely drink nearly as much versus when I would be at home, when I'd be bored. And it was becoming a regular part of my daily pattern, which is a bad thing. That's not what you want alcohol to be.
Yeah.
And so I I completely stopped, or very quickly weaned myself off of that. And the song is about that exactly and perfectly. But in the process of writing it and formulating the lyrics and like stringing together these sentences, I had absolutely no idea that that's what was coming out of me. And I think that happens a lot in art, any type of art, when you kind of let your muscle memory take over and then just sort of tap into the intuitive inner voice that you really, you can do this with writing, you can do this with painting, anything. Once it's out there, you can look back at it and say, hopefully, if you've really done this honestly, you can say, oh, that makes perfect sense of why I said that this way, and this is what it means. That entire song is about sort of like the awareness of alcohol being an issue now, and then pushing back against it.
That's so fascinating.
But I did not sit down and say, I'm going to write a song about this. Not at all.
No, that's what's interesting about it is, as you're talking through this, I completely agree. And by the way, dude, I didn't realize this, but for some reason I thought our viewpoints would differ quite a bit on things. And I'm like, oh, we're going to be arguing, but no, I'm with you. Like everything that you say, I'm like, I'm right there. And so hopefully we don't just sound like a little positive root for each other, cheer squad. But no, like I think there's a huge issue with our own fear, and to step into that process too quickly and say, nope, this is garbage, not going to continue down this road. Before you know what something is, there's this kind of like this, you know what I'm talking about? There's this drive to say like, that's not good. Let me move on to something else. And I love that you're carrying something through and not worrying about what it is or what it's going to become, but just letting it be until when you're done making that evaluation. Now, in my own life and experiences, when I've approached, so Stupid Simple Relationships, this book that I've written about relationships, was born during it's been a subject that I've been researching for 2 decades, but I started writing coming off of my divorce, and I was angry. Like I was like, how in the hell can I be 2 decades into researching this topic and to have paid tens of thousands of dollars to different counselors, all this time, all this money, all these resources, and to still not know what the hell does a relationship actually look like? What does a healthy relationship actually look like? How can I not answer that for myself? And I was angry, and I sat down and I thought, you know what, with everything that I've written, with all the information that I've gathered, I was actually gathering case studies over my entire life as a wedding photographer. And I was writing down information and trying to figure this stuff out. So I started writing, and the first version of this book, I kid you not, reads like an angry 100-page letter to my ex-wife. Like that is exactly, it's divided into 10 chapters, and it's just like word vomit, like hate and anger and all this stuff. And I go back and I'm looking and reading this, and I'm like, this isn't what I'm trying to convey. This is not what I want, but I do see something in here. And what's in here is a framework. Now I need to distill that framework and do what I do. This is my passion, is to distill frameworks. And thus far it's been in language first, and then in photography and lighting and business. Now it's this subject. But that first version was a piece of crap, dude. If I had released that, people would be like, what the hell is this? This guy's just ranting for 100 pages. But that was the point where I realized this is what I have here. Now it has to be distilled, and it has to turn into something. So how often are you doing that? How often are you just like throwing crap at the wall and seeing what comes out of it?
All the time. Yeah. Constantly. All the time. Yeah. I mean, depends on I would say this year, most often I've been doing that with music. I mean, I probably have 24 songs where they're just angry, crappy, or not angry, or just sad, or whatever emotion that never come to fruition. But certain things that I come back to for whatever reason, they work out. But the thing I was trying to drive home, I was trying to relate what I was talking about, what you're talking about, to how this plays out in photography specifically. And I think you kind of need to go through the crappy evolution of things, so that when you're like on with an actual client, you can recognize where to push yourself and let yourself go and create crap even for the client, and then where you need to rein it in and go and be a little more in touch with the muscle memory in a intentional, proactive way, so that you're going to have a happy client at the end of it. Yeah. And I guess at the end of the day, when you do all of these things enough, you literally now have the ability to do that on demand. Like let yourself go and just try stuff, and you're comfortable doing it, or you purposely do things to make yourself uncomfortable so that you're in a new kind of creative mindset. But you are self-aware of this, and you can kind of push and pull as needed, based on time constraints and all the other things that go into, again, what I mostly spend my time doing is wedding photography. But anyway, I don't remember what your original question was.
That's an interesting point on that side, because I want to talk about how the process of testing and play looks dramatically different. The more and more in tune you get, the more years that pass at a certain craft. When you do test, when you do play, it's completely different than the early days. So I get asked the question of like, should I play around? Should I mess with new techniques on client shoots? And usually what I say is no. No, you should not. When you're being paid, when you're on the clock, you should be delivering what you are trained to deliver. You shouldn't be messing around. But I would also caveat that with, if you're 10 years into the craft, your play looks different than it did when you are 1 or 2 years into the craft. I mean, 10 years into this.
The other trick is getting clients that are aware of this as your method or your approach.
For sure.
And want you to have that.
100%. Communicating and having that up front, it kind of gives you free rein to do that. But even now, like if I was to say, Sam, which I would actually hire you and say, Sam, I just want you to do your thing. When you play today, I also know that the majority of what you create is going to turn out great. Now, the thing is, the majority of what you create might not be part of your highlight reel, but for a client, it is good. It is solid. Kind of like if you're watching a basketball game, like not every single layup is going to make the top 10 on ESPN, but it's still a layup. It's still 2 points. You know what I mean? Like, so, but that's your level of play now. And if someone was like just picking up a basketball and they were like, hey, I want to do this behind the back because I want to make it on ESPN's top 10. I'd be like, no, dude, like just go and make a basic layup. Like just do your job type thing. So I feel like there has to be this difference of like playing once you are into something deep versus playing at the beginning of something. Those are two very different things.
Yeah. I see it in my head, literally like a sine wave with a line through it. And, the peaks are good photos where you're really pushing yourself and they're interesting and fun. And then there's the valleys of, you didn't. And the hope and the idea is over the years, that line, like you're constantly in this oscillation of good and bad.
Yeah.
But hopefully the peaks kind of pull that average, that baseline up.
It keeps going up.
And so when you're working with clients, you're always going to hit a certain baseline.
Yeah.
And what you don't want to be is the photographer who hits incredible peaks and then has incredibly low valleys where the baseline stays
where the client satisfaction is not being met.
Yeah. You want to be hitting a peak enough that the baseline is rising, not where it's staying exactly the same, but you have moments of brilliance, like at least if you're doing weddings or anything, where there's an expectation because somebody's paid you. If they invested their money, you've got to hit that baseline. But there are photographers that kind of stay the same, and the wave looks like that.
Yeah, you should be working to make sure that the worst things that you create are above that baseline of what the client expects. Like that really should be the bar. So that's super interesting. And now going back to inspiration. You mentioned that you don't particularly like to follow a lot of other photographers because you don't want. What is the reason?
It's not that I'm not inspired by them or anything. I just don't want to inadvert it because I know part of who I am in my career and my existence in this is teaching people or sharing insights of things. I don't want to, even if you try and avoid seeing something really cool that somebody's done, it's going to influence you. If it's a legitimately awesome idea, like you're going to be thinking in that way, compositionally or lighting wise or whatever, it's going to influence you. And that's not always a bad thing, but I just try and protect myself against that because I don't want to take anybody else's ideas and be too influenced without realizing it or,
I mean, it's a noble way of thinking about it, but don't you feel like that from my perspective, that feels like that would slow down your ability to absorb and try new things if you limit yourself to just your own experiences.
Yeah. But I don't. But I still, randomly come across stuff. I just don't seek it out.
Oh, I
see. Don't completely have like no, I won't look at this type of mentality. I just take it as it comes. If it crosses my path and I find it interesting, I certainly pay attention and my curiosity is piqued. Or I would say I pay a lot more attention to people just outside of my specific focus, which is weddings. So I pay a lot more attention to photographers. I buy and own books from street photographers, and that's more or less, I'm following people that are outside of this genre that I make money in to, kind of draw.
No, I very much like that because I always feel like, your sources of inspiration should be source of inspiration and education. It's great to have some that's within your area of expertise, but the majority of it, I feel like, needs to be outside of it. I don't feel like it's easy. Like there's no way that you're going to see different perspectives by seeing the same things over and over and over again.
Here's the thing. You can almost always take the same approach from some other craft and apply it to what you're doing.
Absolutely.
I do, again, going back to music, there's the idea of mastering your, the final master bus of you have this huge mix with, dozens and dozens of tracks, guitar part, drum part, vocals, all this. It all meets at the master bus, which is left, right, 2 tracks. Simple. But there's this concept in the audio world of mastering. So you've got mixing, which is kind of balancing the mix and all this. And then there's this entire other craft, although it's not quite this way anymore. A lot of people do both mixing and mastering, but it used to be, and still the top of the top, send that final mix off to somebody different to master the photo or master the mix,
the track. Yeah.
Master the track. Yeah. To be, to hit a certain amount of loudness, to have a slightly more balanced, translatable sound from one listening environment to another. And I took this idea and applied it to how I edit actually. A lot of photographers start from editing a raw file. Makes sense. You get a lot more flexibility with your white balance and shifting colors later and dynamic range, all that stuff. But if you take your edited raw file and export it as a JPEG, which I consider sort of it's mixed now, and then you edit again another process of the specific JPEG file, you get a different response and I think a more polished, interesting look. And I call this concept mastering your photo, which is not a great concept because it's the idea that from this audio industry that, way of thinking that totally translates and works well in photography editing. And so,
I agree. It so translates across the board and everything. And it goes the other way too. Like I find that, what's interesting for me is, and I've discussed this a bit before, but my passion is not photography. My passion, and it took me a long time to figure this out. It's taken me 2 decades to figure out kind of what I'm actually passionate about. And a lot of work in different areas. So from language studies and writing books on that to photography and then to lighting and then to business and sales and all these different things. And what I realized is that while I've been successful in photography and I'm decent at it, it's not my passion. My passion is actually taking complex subjects and distilling them down into simple concepts. Hence the idea of Stupid Simple as a podcast of like discussing unique ideas and making them approachable and relatable on different areas. But I found that the way that I think applies backwards and forwards. So like when I approach this, I started doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu last year before all this pandemic stuff. And as I was doing everything, I was applying this framework notion to every single thing that I was doing. And my teachers would say like, now this is how new I was to, I don't know, do you watch MMA or jiu-jitsu or anything like that?
No, nope.
Okay.
I mean, I have, but not something I seek out.
There's 4 like kind of basic positions in jiu-jitsu. And let's just say that 2 of the best positions you can be in is either sitting on top of somebody, which they call mount, or you can have their back. So you're taking their back, right? So our teacher is teaching us like how to get to mount and how to take someone's back. And I'm sitting there like, which this is a different topic that brings up my ADHD past, but I'm sitting there asking my teacher, why? Why do I need to be in mount, or why do I need to take someone's back? And my teacher is like, you're an idiot. Just do what I'm telling you to do. And I'm sitting there having flashbacks to like high school and junior high when everybody thought I was an idiot because I kept asking the question, why? But I started to realize that the way that you see the world is sort of something that you apply backwards and forwards. So the way that you're taking from music and applying to photography, I would imagine you're also taking from photography and applying to other aspects of your life, the things that you've done on this side, and you're kind of going back and forth. And I agree, there's no way to come up with the ideas and the frameworks and the approach without going backwards and forwards in other subjects. If you keep yourself in one place, it's really hard to grow.
Yes. Yeah, completely. You nailed it.
So
I'm fascinated by this. Are you keeping up with the jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu this year? Is that able to be done given the...
Yeah. So what we didn't know in 2019 was that jiu-jitsu is possibly the greatest way of spreading COVID-19.
Yeah. That's
I mean, there's no better way than to be grappling with somebody and sweating in each other's mouths. So no, during 2020, pretty much all jiu-jitsu gyms have been shut down. It depends on where you go. Like I think in what state you're in, and everyone's got a different approach to this thing, man. But in California, at least verbally, they're quite serious. What they actually do, not so much. But yeah, most gyms here. So I roll still with my business partner, Justin, but that's just because we know, we're in essentially
your own little bubble,
our own little bubble and pod. But dude, it's so much fun. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to ask you is, for me, these other outlets, they're so incredibly important to my own, not only development as a creative person, but just mental health. Like, so the things that I've gotten into is jiu-jitsu, the technical aspect mixed with the physical aspect. It's unlike anything that I've ever done before. It's like, take all the stuff that you love about everything technical and the crafts that you've mentioned, from music to whatever, and then blend in fitness. And that's essentially what you have in jiu-jitsu. The other thing I've gotten into is cycling. So I'm curious, what have you gotten into this year other than your music?
Yeah, running. I've always been physically active in terms of running, and then recommitting to now for a little while to fasting, or at least not in any extreme way. Like some people really go crazy with it, but just having more discipline over my diet in general.
Yeah.
I went through a couple years back a phase of really strict calorie counting and logging every single thing I would eat. So I'm kind of back in that phase, along with just really disciplined fasts. Cause I think, I get downvoted so much on Reddit whenever I'm like, people are like, what do you do to prepare for a wedding? I'm like, I fast. People are like, that's the worst thing you could possibly do. You need a full stomach, you need energy. But no, it really works for me. I think honestly, so much clearer when I've, for whatever reason, when my body is just a little bit, when I'm in that fat burning zone, it works for me, and it's consistently been demonstrated and played out enough that I know it's not like maybe, who knows?
No, it works for a lot of people.
Placebo. I know it's working. Yeah, for whatever reason, it is what's working for me. So I've kind of recommitted to that a bit, and but honestly, dude, I spend so much time doing music. That is my. I was built to be a wedding photographer. I would say that is my calling in life. So it resonates with me on a very deep level, but my passion, which I think that's a separate thing. My passion is music. That's not something I ever seek to make money from. It's not something that I even really like promoting because I love it for myself. I mean, I literally just like go on a run and listen to my own songs on repeat, which might sound really lame, but like that
sounds a little bit tacky.
It's my safe space to just create something and then just enjoy this thing that I put out into the world. That's what I spend a ton of time doing. And
I kind of love that though, because you hit on something that I try to get people to understand a lot, which is your passion doesn't have to be your income, and you shouldn't, like, something is kind of ruined in the process of actually making it your profession.
Big time.
So that piece there of like, keeping music as your passion. I'm sure now, first of all, it kind of inspires me to get back into the producing and the mixing and the music part. I really, when I was at my peak of writing music, I wanted to get the Yamaha. There was this keyboard. It was like the YZ8 or something like that. It's basically the best like mixing and producing keyboard you can get. And I'm sure like this is like 10 years ago. No, this is like 14 years ago. But I could actually now afford it. So I kind of want to like get it back into it. And
it's so nice to be able to afford all this stuff now. I mean, in college, like I said, I went into a lot of credit card debt trying to just buy what I thought I needed to make everything sound as good as it could be. And I didn't know what I didn't know about a lot of that stuff. So I ended up wasting a lot of money. But now it's fun to be able to say like, oh, I can actually afford this plugin without having to like check to go into debt, even check my, my bank account to make sure I have the money. It's really nice.
No, 100%.
It's funny too, because I often think about what constraints enable in a creative process. Mm-hmm. And I get really worried, and I've seen this play out not this year, but before this, specifically related to music and sometimes photography as well, where I do have access to pretty much whatever I would like, within reasonable means, cameras and lenses and all this stuff. And I think that you lose something when you don't have the constraint of like, here's what you've got, you got to deal with it and work with this and solve the problem.
Definitely do, man.
Yeah. Being able to just buy your way out of any situation can be a huge
it's a growth limiter. It's
yeah, right. But it's but you got to strike that balance between what your time is worth. If it comes down to just spending the money on this new product makes you faster. I don't know. It's really fascinating me, the idea of constraint. And then as you earn more money or become more successful, you actually start to lose touch or lose some ability or something that enabled you to get to where you are.
I kind of look at that from the side of, if you're going to make something your profession, I feel like those limitations are absolutely critical to a level of mastery that you wouldn't be able to obtain otherwise. If something's just your passion, your music, I think you should spend the money that you want to enjoy it, because that is what it's about. And I kind of relay this to racing a car. So I used to teach, Justin and I, we got really into high performance driving. We would build out race cars, and then cars that are dedicated for track. So you don't do this on a street. You go to an actual track and you race these cars. Now we got good enough over a few years that we could actually start instructing our friends.
Oh, wow.
And what I realized was a lot of our friends who already had money, they would step into the field with really nice cars like Audi R8s and BMW M3s and just fully decked out $100,000 cars that are ready for the track. And meanwhile, Justin and I started on S2000s, which are kind of like arguably like the Miata and the Honda S2000.
Honda S2000?
Yes, okay, the Miata, the Mazda Miata and the Honda S2000s are arguably the best track cars for the money. Miatas are the best ones to learn
3
on.
Miatas, I think, maybe 4 over the years.
They're fantastic. Yeah. And one of the things that you learn when you're racing a Miata is how to conserve power. Okay. Because you've driven your Miata. They're not powerful little machines, getting them up to, but they're light.
Yeah.
But getting them up to speed takes a little bit of time.
Yeah.
So you learn how to brake and conserve momentum, and you learn how to drive the car in a way where when you get more power, you get dramatically faster. So you could train on a Miata. And then if I handed you an S2000 at that point, you'd be beating out people that have Ferraris and BMWs and every other more expensive car, because these friends that were coming into the sport, their car was doing too much of the work for them. So they were never learning how to properly handle the car. They were never learning how to conserve momentum. They were never learning how to properly brake. All of these different things, the car was doing so much for them that they kind of approached from that standpoint. And the person that went ground up from a go-kart to a Miata to an S2000 would just destroy them with the most average of equipment. And I look at that in photography as well. I don't know if you see that the same thing where
totally.
But when it comes to like my other thing, so I like cycling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sam, I own a $15,000 bike. I didn't pay that for it, but I own a top of the line $15,000 racing bike that is so far beyond my capabilities on a bike that I'm kind of embarrassed by it, because people look at it and they're like, oh, that guy's legit. And then I'm like posting times that like might as well be on a Huffy. Like I might as well be riding like this piece of crap bike. But I like it. I like cycling. I have no intention of making it a profession. I just want to enjoy it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Totally. That's a really good point. But in your profession, it's interesting to think about how you need to artificially create constraints sometimes to keep yourself moving in a creative,
absolutely
direction of growth. And it's hard to do when you do have access, and you probably really like, well, I don't know, many people, photography is their passion and hobby, and they also make money from it. It's tough, but it's good to talk about. That's why, hopefully some people are going to get something out of this conversation. But I'm fascinated by your driving history. I've never been on a track, but I do love cars. I've gone through many cars, nothing too crazy, but
it's fun, dude. Like,
how do you feel about electric cars in this world of track racing and all that? I feel like they must do a lot of the work for you that you mentioned. Maybe it's just an entirely fundamentally different approach. It's changed gears anymore. So it's like,
that stuff is going to be, I mean, the whole concept of, it's weird, dude, because, and you have to think of this you can translate this into any different medium, right? So photography, racing, whatever it is. But the technology eventually takes things that you could once make part of your profession, and it removes them. And your profession has to adapt to a different line of kind of standard and a different sort of approach. And in racing, it's so funny, because in racing, if you look historically at it, simply being good at shifting with your clutch, right? You guys have Anthony over here probably doesn't know what it's like to drive him. I always bring Anthony into these conversations.
That's crazy.
I drive a stick shift.
Anthony drives a stick shift. Okay. And you drive a stick shift. So
I used to. I don't. I actually drive an electric car now. So
at one point, though, you have learned how to drive it. This is going to be a conversation that you realize that our children are never going to have a stick shift car. No. But in racing, at one point, simply shifting and learning how to shift up and down and to be able to do this process quickly was a huge piece of your success on a racetrack. Then came essentially paddle shifting cars, right? Like, so you have F1 introducing paddle shifters, and now there is no clutch anymore. So guess what? All the people that grew up using their left leg to control the clutch and then to also control the brake, now you're basically saying, look, the F1 car can now do the clutch and you're just paddle shifting. So what are you going to do with your left foot? And they're like, well, I guess my left foot just relaxes. Well, this next generation, who only trains on the paddle shifters, then comes into the sport. And what they learn is that, hey, I can actually use my left foot to brake. And so what they learn how to do is to start trail braking. And this means like when you enter a turn, they could actually, as they come off the gas, be applying the brake and going back and forth seamlessly between this trail and entrance braking would then increase their speeds. And so this next generation that came in knew how to essentially left foot brake. And this became part of racing. And all the clutch shifters were then at a disadvantage because none of them had grown up knowing what it was to left foot brake. Most of them kind of like just faded away into.
This aligns perfectly with, I'm sure, a lot of things, but absolutely perfectly with photography tools.
Yes.
And the transition from DSLR to mirrorless, and why I think I tend to be really fixated and obsessed with like trying out and giving a meaningful run of any new camera that that comes out that has, some new approach in terms of autofocusing, or, the DSLR to mirrorless transition is the most obvious one, because you don't want to be the clutch photographer while everybody else is driving with, whatever the other thing you said was, with their left and right leg.
Yeah, left foot braking. It's exactly.
Yes, it's exactly that. And if you find yourself resisting, you really got to have an honest conversation with, like, okay, am I in a position to be left behind here? If photography is I think this is why a lot of photographers get really like defensive, or I don't know. Like it incites anger and fury within them. Oftentimes, when you debate somebody online about a new piece of technology and they just don't get it, they're like, "Why?
Absolutely.
What is the point?" But the point is maybe not the current iteration of how this technology is being implemented, but down the line, it's going to put you at a disadvantage if you haven't kept up.
Absolutely. I mean,
yeah.
In translating this into photography, at one point, in the 80s and the 90s. Understanding film and how to properly expose was enough to be successful as a professional photographer. That was enough. It's the exact same thing. It's the clutch, the person that's good with the clutch, right? Then the left foot breakers come in with digital. In photography, it was digital. And you go, okay, now everybody can learn how to properly expose, because now we can see what's on the back of the camera. So this is no longer a piece of what it means to be a professional, and you adapt again. Now where it's going is, you wouldn't believe how many messages I get of people that are absolutely furious when I show how to create professional images with your phone. Like, not like an actual, like, you're going to take this onto a shoot right now, but like a pro quality image from a phone. And people are like, how dare you show secrets of the professionals? And I go, look, dude, if your career relies on making a professional image with a dedicated camera, like a DSLR, you're in trouble. If that is what you're depending on, you are in trouble.
100%. Yeah. It's fascinating, but here's the thing. Here's what I find interesting to just ponder, if nothing else. There is a certain, I think, balance, or a certain number of constraints. Let's go back to driving, I guess, where I bet the net result of having to use a clutch with the other two pedals yielded a certain style or a certain approach to driving that was only going to surface
stay relevant
with that constraint. And
absolutely.
So with film, you get a certain style that is not able to be replicated, not visual, not in terms of the look of film, but like the actual method of shooting. Your approach to photographing somebody with a film camera is very different oftentimes than photographing them with a digital one. So it's going to yield a different visual aesthetic. And some people are always going to align more with that as a consequence of that constraint. And
absolutely.
And anyway, so it's fascinating to think about trying to recognize how to balance that and when to pull back from being obsessed with the latest and greatest, but also not getting lost. It's really tough.
It's tough, but the way that I see every industry going. So taking this back to your original question was electric cars on the racetrack. Right. Now what's happening essentially is basically racing in the future is going to be distilled down to simply the fastest line on a racetrack. It's simply your ability to navigate the car at speed, to be able to control the car through the turns, to be able to, that is what the sport will eventually be distilled down into. Because I mean, these electric cars, their balance is absolutely fantastic. You know, once they're able to race around the track more than a few laps without dying, this is going to be the thing. But the batteries and the positioning is distributed across the bottom, which creates this wonderfully amazing balance. So the handling is great. You no longer have to worry about, any sort of shifting whatsoever. You have just your brake. You have so basically you kind of simplify as technology improves, the technical limitations of something get thrown out, and the technical limitations can no longer be part of the process of being professional at that thing. Instead, being a pro at something gets distilled down to exactly what that thing is. And in photography, it's simply going to be your ability to think and translate into the medium Like it's basically your ability to actually deliver what your clients want. It really comes more down to knowing your clients. It comes down to knowing psychology and being able to say, I know what you value. Anybody can create this thing. Anybody can go and do this thing, but only I can be the one to actually pull out of you what you want, what you need, and then to translate it into the medium. Yep. That's what I think the art's going to be distilled down into.
Fascinating. Well, there's always, hopefully, going to be space for that and a need for that. And somebody willing to hire somebody to do that thing.
What is your take on it? Where do you feel like that photography industry in general is kind of heading?
I don't know. The convergence of photography and videography is fascinating. I think I can see it more clearly now being something that becomes just an expectation. Like, you don't do video also? You can't just pull your still frames from your video and we have photos to use there. But I don't know. It's so tricky. And weddings are so unique too, in terms of photos. People have a very deep ingrained expectation and association with wedding photos specifically, way more than I think videography. But videography is still, really great and can be done excellent. But I think demonstrated in my experience this year, the photography is the last thing to go on the vendor list, which I was really grateful for a lot of my clients.
For sure.
Even the venue went before most everything else. Anyway, I don't know where it's headed. I honestly, I can't tell you, but I think if nothing else, with the attention spans becoming more and more zapped, a photo gets the idea and gets whatever point across way faster than video ever does. So I think it has that going for it. As eye-catching and cool as videos can look, a photo is instantaneous in time. So I think it does help that as people's attention spans get more and more limited. But it's also really fascinating because I say that, but at the same time, I tend to find myself more now than ever listening to multi-hour long podcasts like this and binge watching 16 hours worth of a television show, and like an hour and a half, 2 hour movie seems too short. It's really bizarre, actually.
I honestly think there's this pendulum, right? And the pendulum right now has swung so far to the side of, you got to have a catchy title. It's got to be clickbaity. You got to get people in there. If you don't get their attention in 10 seconds, it's over. You got to have a 30-second soundbite. We need to be able to do something in 60 seconds. If you can't explain in 60 seconds, then you're done. We've gotten to this place of such an extreme on that side that, again, part of my drive in this and saying this is long form is to get completely away from that. And I think whenever you have solid swings to one side, whether it is digital photography, you then feel a solid swing back towards analog, which is film. And whenever you have, these huge swings towards, I'll guarantee in electric cars, when everybody's driving an electric car, it's going to be a status symbol to own a gas-powered vehicle. Like we're going to be always having these flip sides to kind of balance things out. But I agree with you. It's hard to know exactly where the industry is going. I am curious though, you have been fortunate enough, and I think, again, it's usually the paranoia in someone like you and me that makes us build a business that has multiple revenue streams, because we know what it's like when S hits the fan, right? So you build something up and we don't know COVID's going to hit, but that it is possible to lose a revenue stream. So you're fortunate enough this year to have had those revenue streams, but what has the wedding side for you looked like?
In terms of like actual wedding clients and going out and shooting?
Rescheduling and shooting and all that kind of stuff.
It's at least 50% of that income was wiped out completely, at least 50%. I am looking busier than ever before at this point. A metric I'm always obsessed with, and I'm shocked more CRMs don't have is like a giant button. This is where you are relative to where you were this time last year.
Yes.
Like, that should be a thing. Anyway, so relative to where I was at this point last year or any year before now, I am way ahead of my booking curve. So that is a result of new clients coming in, that I hadn't had a previous relationship with, and then 2020 clients rescheduling. But I would say, I don't know, I did probably a dozen sort of on the original day that they had booked me for. They decided to do like an hour and a half ceremony with like a few photos before or after. And that was really nice. I see a lot of those people getting a little nervous because I think a lot of them are going to come around to the realization that, yeah, they rescheduled the reception and the party to be next year. But I think now that they're like legally married and having done that, they're not going to follow through with the reception. They're just going to say, we're good.
We've had quite a few of those. Yeah, we've had quite a few of those. I do agree with you too. A point that you made earlier was that, photography feels relatively stable in terms of like mindset and what product a client wants. So even though we're seeing so much rescheduling, we're even seeing some people just like, look, I'm good without doing a big wedding. We're going to do an elopement. Generally, they keep their photography and they find a way to use their photography. Like, hey, can we do a destination wedding? And instead of, doing this many hours, we're going to bring you to this place. And we just want to do like an adventure shoot and like do that kind of stuff. So it feels like photography is in a relatively secure place in terms of like client demand. But I do think that the scope and nature of weddings is going to be changed for a long time. That feels.
Yeah. I'm also really interested in the what's going to happen to the number of photographers, because I could see it going either way, and I have no idea which way, like how to track this kind of thing. Sorry, getting a phone call.
Well, so far, I think it's been going down. I mean,
well, here's the thing. Yeah, I could see a lot of photographers
leaving
that just leaving. Yeah. And just like, 9, 12 months of really not shooting much at all is enough to just get somebody moving on to something else and getting maybe a full-time job somewhere, working for a completely different thing or going back to a job they previously had. I don't see a lot of photographers starting, maybe they lost their job and they're like, oh, well, I've always wanted to be a wedding photographer. I'm going to start that. I don't see that really happening. So for the established people that had the buffer and could weather the storm, I think it's, in another year or two going to be pretty fantastic. That's my hope.
That's the way I'm looking at it too.
Yeah. But I could also see, just another year or two of constant struggle and clients themselves not having the budge to justify spending thousands of dollars on a photographer. It's tough. I am also very grateful. I feel like I live in the perfect market, DC, Baltimore, Virginia area. I've got 3 entirely different states that are all really close together. And I've got New York and Philly right up the road. Although Philly, for whatever reason, is really its own bubble when it comes to the photo industry. I think only one wedding there. It's bizarro. Anyway, I love Philly. I want to shoot more there, but I always tend to skip up to New York. And anyway, a lot of government workers, a lot of people that just, during the 2008 downturn is when I started really shooting weddings around 2010 or whatever. And we were completely insulated because the federal government is gigantic. And that's what most jobs revolve around in my market. So that's a great place to be, located. Where you are and the markets that you can serve is absolutely fantastic. Dude, I could literally talk to you for hours. And I think what I would love to do is, I've had you close to 2 hours now. So I lost track.
There are so many topics that I still wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to talk to you about things outside of photography more. I wanted to talk to you about some of your favorite assignments that you've gotten. I think there's just so many different topics, but if you're down, I'd love to just have you back some point in the future and we'll just have to make this a regular thing.
Dude, absolutely. By the way, are your headphones on in reverse?
Are they?
I think they are.
Yes.
The whole time I kept seeing that. I was like, it's really bugging me.
Has that bothered you from the start?
Yeah, from the start. It's like, wait a second.
That's hilarious. So yeah, dude, I'd love to have you back. But in the meantime, if you guys, please be sure to check out Sam's work. Also hop onto Patreon, right? It's probably the best place to kind of follow up on everything that you're doing.
Yeah, that's where Patreon. I could talk for hours just on Patreon for sure, but it's a subscription based platform. It's a picture, a feed of social media or a blog or something like that I can flag certain posts to only be accessible by people that are active on certain tiers, and the tiers cost money. So there's also a lot of free resources there, public posts that I've just opened up to everybody eventually. So patreon.com/Sam Hurd. It's HURD. That's where I'm most active. And then my website, Sam Hurd Photography.
Awesome, brother. We'll link them all up, and can't wait for our next conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Great. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. You're probably the highest quality experience. I feel like we're sitting as much as we could be in the same room, which really helps when people aren't yelling into AirPods Pros or something. It's like so nice to have good audio.
I agree, dude. It was fun, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks.
All right, brother. See ya.